I keep getting Snapchats from my boyfriend, but they're not from him. Normally, I'm not much of an app user. In fact, I had what my friends called a dumb phone up until about a year ago, until I got my new phone. I honestly never felt like I was missing out. As cool as my friends made Twitter, Instagram, and whatever an Angry Bird was sound, I always knew those things would take me away from the thing I really had to put my focus on, my studies and my sanity. So when I got my first iPhone last year, it was a pretty big deal to my friends. Once I had it, I quickly realized how cool the interface was and how truly useful it could be. For 2 weeks I went app crazy, though that eventually lost its pizzazz, until David and I started dating. By then I had gotten used to the smartphone world, and he, a tech nerd, was all about it. After a few months, he convinced me I needed to download Snapchat for funny conversations via pics, babe. You can guess where it ended up. I didn't mind, however, since David and I had been going strong for a while, and I trusted him never to use any pictures against me. And over time, we began to use the app mostly for enjoyment and humor, for the most part. The first time it happened, I was walking out of the mall from work. I was on my phone, which I will admit I'm now a little bit addicted to. Angry Birds is addicting, and a Snapchat from David came in. It was blurry, but I could make out some of the ground and maybe a part of a car, assuming it was a mistake and nothing more. I thought little of it for the rest of the night until dinner. "Nice butt snap today, babe," I said with a wink. He looked up from his mac and cheese. "What are you talking about? Your butt snapped me a pic of the ground or something earlier? When I was leaving work at the mall, I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a mistake." David looked a bit confused and went back to eating. When I asked him what was up, all he said was, "Must have been a software issue," and went back to his food. As a serious techie, he takes any accidents he has with his devices super personal. I let it go, and we went back to our normal routine. For a few days, all snaps were of the usual fodder: good-looking food, ridiculous selfie faces, and a few NSFW messages thrown in for old time's sake. A few days later, as I was walking out of work, my phone buzzed. I was crossing the parking lot when I clicked the screen on and saw the notification from David. The snap lasted only 3 seconds and was blurry, but looked like a very pixelated and zoomed in picture of a person, maybe with blonde hair. I thought it was strange, so I took a selfie and snapped him back. "What was that?" I received a reply almost immediately of David's face, only it was kind of distorted and weird. In fact, I could barely tell it was him because of the lighting. I figured it was some kind of weird filter, or the fact that he seemed to have a bright light on behind him, but his face was completely shadowed in a silhouette. Almost immediately, I received another from him, this time clearly of his face with a confused expression. Taken at that kind of angle, a picture is taken without letting your coworkers know you're taking a selfie. Then another came in. This one was a bit more zoomed out. It was of a petite blonde girl walking in a parking lot. It took me about 10 seconds to realize that girl in the picture was me. I had no idea how David did it, but I was honestly impressed. Startled at first, but impressed. I snapped back a kissy face with a heart emoji. David snapped back from work with seemingly confused look on his face. I looked around the parking lot, but it was basically empty. He was nowhere in sight. "How are you doing that?" I sent back, given my ridiculous selfie face imaginable. "Doing what?" he sent back on another yet low-key work selfie. I got in the car thinking little of it and went home to make some lunch. Now we live in a very close outskirts of a big city, so our apartment is very packed into a surrounded neighborhood. We drew the short straw when we moved in and didn't get a parking space, so we have to park on the street. Even though it was midday on a Tuesday, there are no spots near my house. I had to park a few blocks away and walk. As I walked, naturally I played with my phone. Even though it was broad daylight and I lived in a nice neighborhood, eyes on your phone or ground are an easy way to keep from making eye contact with any creepy guys potentially hanging around the street. I texted a few of my friends about weekend plans when another Snapchat came in from David. This time, it was of me getting out of my car. I stopped and looked around, figuring he must have been hiding somewhere. He's a total nerd like that. After a few moments, the breeze got too cold and I figured he'd meet me inside eventually. "You'll freeze out here, nerd," I said lovingly, and walked towards my house. I continued walking down the street and another notification popped up. 2 new snaps. I opened the first snap and it was of my kitchen table with a large pot, jarred sauce, and a box of rigatoni. Pasta for dinner, it said. I replied with a smile and I said, sure, smiley face, and kept walking. The second snap played. It was of his weird silhouetted face again. The caption said, I am not cold. A new Snapchat notification popped up. This one of me walking down the street just moments before. The caption was simple. I like you. I replied thinking it was David with a snap of my face and quite generously the low-cut skirt beneath it with an I like you too. He sent another back of him in my kitchen with the cat taunting him with a rigatoni. A moment later, a second snap came in of a black screen with a giant emoji with a huge smile face on it. I had to admit, however he was sending these snaps was really quite impressive. I'd have to ask him tonight how he did it. When I got into the house, I saw him cooking and didn't have time to ask him how he played his pranks. The water was over boiling, the sauce way too hot, and he was looking as lost as ever in front of the stove. He's a shitty cook, but he tries, so I love him for it. I jumped in. I got swept up in making dinner and forgot to ask again about his pranks until he stopped for a moment to run to the bathroom. I heard the door click and my phone chime. A snap of me cooking popped onto the screen. You are so pretty, it said. I just smiled and put my phone down. When he got out of the bathroom, dinner was ready and I told him to grab a plate. We served ourselves and began to talk about our days. So, how do you keep doing those snaps, I said. And how did you take those pictures of me leaving work? What are you talking about? I explained again the pictures he sent, and he looked confused, denying the whole thing. He's always had that nerdy, awkward sense of humor, and it wouldn't be the first time I had ruined a joke or surprise too early, so I just smiled and changed the conversation. He even played up the awkward reserved part the entire time too, as if my questioning had truly confused him. This was the most intricate prank he had played to date. Throughout the night, I got a few more from his account when I wasn't paying attention. He must have sneakily gotten the pictures when he crossed the room on occasion. For the most part, he was busy at his computer, working on a program he and his friends were building, and I was sitting on the couch reading. I thought little of it, and quietly enjoyed the fact that, for the first time in a few months, he was being pretty forward and flirty. I liked being noticed. That was until we went to bed. I figured since he had been sending me all those weird messages to get my attention, he wanted all of my attention. But when the lights went out, he kissed me goodnight, rolled over, and started snoring. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed. A Snapchat popped up of me from earlier, walking from the car. A second was of me in the car, and the caption, I am always watching. The third was of me sitting in my living room reading, only I realized the angle was off. It was taken up high, as if from the top corner of the room. The only caption was a heart emoji. The fourth was of me in my car. During a quick moment, I had picked my nose. Always, it said. I needed to know how the fuck he did this. It was going beyond cute and funny and now a little creepy. Most importantly, how did he get that shot of me in the car earlier? I was alone. Did he have a fucking hidden camera installed on my dash? This is going a bit too far for a cute prank. I went to check his phone to see if he had some weird app installed, but it was powered off. A little annoyed, I woke him up and started yelling at him. He, as most sleeping people would do, woke up confused and annoyed and answered with a sleepy, "Yes, dear, we'll take care of it tomorrow," and just turned over and went to bed, immediately regaining his snoring tempo. A new snap came in, and I shoved the phone in his face, but he didn't want to wake. This one was of me reading a few hours earlier, only it was an ultra close-up. There was no way a hidden camera could have taken it. The space in front of my couch is completely wide open, and this was taken at eye level, maybe 2 feet from my face. I like you, it said. A chill went down my spine, almost too terrified to answer. I turned the camera on, off my phone. I put the Snapchat to selfie and turned the flash on. The bright flash was the only light in my nearby pitch black room and illuminated my face and the room around me for a split second. Who the fuck is this? I captioned the photograph. Nothing. I took another with my flash. Seriously, who is this? A new snap came in of a black screen with a large smile emoji on it. I'm a friend, it said. How the fuck are you doing this? Nothing. I sent one more back, the flash on my phone illuminating my face and messy bedroom room for a split second. Why are you doing this? No answer. I sent back another. Please stop. A message of a black screen with a giant sad face emoji came back. I am sorry. I sent back another. Please go away. After a moment, another notification popped up. Another black screen with an unsure face emoji and caption. I am sorry, Sasha, but I cannot do that. I sent one last reply. A single word. Why? A few moments passed. My phone buzzed with a Snapchat notification. I opened it and my blood ran cold. The snap displayed a picture that took me a second to comprehend. There, in the center of the screen was a girl. Me. Sitting in my bed. My face, in the picture, just barely illuminated by the flash of my phone from the picture I had taken just moments before. I could see David sleeping next to me, and our cat lying lazily off in the corner. The picture had been taken from not 5 feet away. Before I ever had a chance to scream, I felt a cold whisper in my ear. Because I really like you. It has been many years since I've told anyone about my experience. I normally keep it to myself, as anyone I tell it to thinks I'm crazy. I don't blame them either. If someone told me this story, I would think they were a lunatic. Be me. Just got out of high school. Wanted to do something fun. I decide that I'll kayak through the Florida Everglades by myself. My mom hates the idea. My dad thinks I'll be fine. I had been camping, backpacking, and kayaking for about 7 years then, so I was fairly experienced in bushcraft. Ergo, like my dad, I thought I would be fine. Boy, was I wrong. As a precaution, my dad gives me my great-grandfather's old groundhog hunting rifle. My face when my great-grandfather's groundhog rifle is a M1903 Springfield. Regardless, I grab my shit and rush off into the unknown. I decide to kayak around the Thousand Island portion of the Everglades. I push off a small island known as Chokoloskee, and I made my way into the wild. I was ecstatic. Finally, I get to enjoy my favorite hobby with no one around to bother me. I camp at a small dinky campground known as Mormon Key, pick related. It was a 10-plus mile kayaking trip to get there, plus part of that was just navigated through the mangroves. Needless to say, I was tired as fuck. Make camp, cook dinner, watch the sunset, and go to sleep. I wake up to howling in the distance. Sounds like a wolf. Problem is, wolves have been extinct in the Everglades since like 1910. Kind of weirded out, but there is a body of water between me and the howling, so I don't really dwell on it. I wake up, make up a quick breakfast, and continue heading south with my kayak. End up going down the Lost Man's River. See red circle and pick, and I'll talk about the pick and show the pick after I finish this one thread. Find a place down the river to camp, set up camp, eat and sleep. That would be my last comfortable night of sleep for the rest of the trip, and maybe the rest of my life. Wake up the next day refreshed and head further down the river. Eventually hit the mainland. See blue circle on pick. Okay, so now we will talk about the pick. So he adds this picture of, I guess, Google Maps or Google Earth or whatever. We can see Mormon Key. You know, it's out in the Everglades. No people around, no cities around. I think the closest city is Everglades City or Chokoloskee, where he originally left from. And then he headed down south towards Mormon Key, stayed there, and then I guess he went through that little inlet, and then he's all the way into the Everglades now at the blue circle. So he's a ways away from civilization and people in general. But anyways, let's continue the thread. OP writes about, I walk about 1.5 miles east before I decide to turn back. That was a mistake. I tripped, fell, hit my head, and knocked myself out. Fuck me. I wake up about 2 hours later. I pick myself up, orient myself, and start heading back towards the kayak. I get to where the kayak was, and it was gone. The rope is still tied to a mangrove, but the middle is chewed through. It finally hits me. The kayak is fucking gone. My tent, most of my food, water, other gear, and most importantly, my transportation is gone. I decide to get to dry land, as I don't want to be in the mangroves at night. I get to dry land, eat a granola bar, and decide to head northeast in the morning to try and get help. I fall asleep with my head on my pack and next to a fire. I wake up only 4 hours later to the noise of howling. Wolf howling. Once again, baffled, seeing as they should be extinct around here. I shine my light into the brush. I see an absolutely gargantuan wolf, bigger than I've ever seen. Think the size of a rhinoceros. I flip the fuck out and add what little dry wood I have to the fire. I spend the night clutching my rifle next to a dying fire. They eventually fuck off, but I don't let down my guard. Around sunrise, I immediately head northeast. I'm tired, hungry, thirsty, and just want to get help. I'm slowly trudging through knee-high water. I consider ditching the rifle to get rid of the weight. But then I remember those wolves. I keep going on and on mindlessly, checking every 10 minutes or so to make sure I am on course. In the middle of these mangroves is a small dry area. I figure that I could rest here for a short while. I walk into the clearing and I see a structure. It's a pyramid in the fucking Everglades. Think of Pic related, but smaller. I am dumbfounded at what a pyramid would be doing this far out here. I didn't think that the local tribes ever got this advanced. I needed to keep moving, but I just found a hidden pyramid in the middle of the Everglades. Archaeologists and historians would kill to find this. I figure I need to stop and at least look at the place. I climb up to the top and there's a pit. Just a dark pit. Out of the pit, I can hear something faint. I get down on all fours so I can hear it better. I realize that there is wailing coming from the pit. Griefly, painful wailing. I probably get up and try to get the fuck out of there. In a rush, I trip. See a pattern? After tripping, the wailing turns to straight up screaming. It sounds like a fucking banshee. I'm convinced that anyone within 10 miles could have heard that shit. It was so deafening. I started hurrying back down when I see those damn dogs. There was a pack of 5 of them, all completely fucking huge. I drop my pack and climb up a cypress tree. I fire all 5 of my rounds into the biggest fucker there. He bleeds out under the tree, while the screaming from the pyramid is just getting louder and louder. The pack drags away the dead dog into the mangroves. I take my opportunity, jump down, and start booking it northeast. I left my pack to save weight, and am going through the mangroves as fast as I possibly can. I even throw aside the rifle, as I have no ammo for it, and it is just dead weight. Eventually, after an hour, I can't hear the screaming anymore. I'm dehydrated as fuck and hungry, but I keep moving forward. I find myself on a road, loop road scenic drive, with a bunch of police cars. They hesitate when they see me because I look like I've been through hell and back. They get me water and a granola bar and tell me to sit tight for an ambulance. When I ask how they knew to find me, they said some guy on the road called in about hearing incessant shooting a couple hours prior, and they had been searching since. I get to the hospital and the police interrogate me. I hesitate and tell them that I got lost and fired those shots at an alligator. They accept it and leave me alone. My family comes up in hysterics to see me. I confide in my dad about what actually happened. Naturally, he doesn't believe me and said that the dehydration must have made me hallucinate it. I go home and keep bringing it up. Eventually, he has me admitted to a psychiatrist for delusions and hallucinations. Gee, thanks, Dad. I've brought up the story to 2 other people, and both had the same response. I'm never going back to that place again, and I just want to forget about this. But I felt like I needed to tell someone. I don't care if you believe me or not, as no one does. I just needed to get it out. I don't know what I found out there, and it will, probably, stay that way. Good night, X. I'm going to bed. And then some people comment in the thread asking questions, and just a discussion pops up, and I'll read some of the comments people have on the discussion, and the OP eventually comes back and responds to some of them. One person says, "Good tale, Florida Anon. Did you feel any Indiana Jones vibes at all, or just terror? Cool story, bro. Take someone else to that pyramid and get rich. You are a schizo. It was dehydration. Fuck huge native wolves, get BTFO by Explorer in his rifle. Classic. Why didn't you tell about the pyramid though? Go to some archaeologist or college professor and tell them you found some pyramid in the forest. Don't include the wolves or screaming, just the structure. Maybe get some other guys to see it. Take me there, Anon. Let's hunt some spirits and wolves together. Bringing a K-nut might actually help you out of this one. Just woke up. Figure I may as well answer a few questions before I head out for the day. Did you feel any Indiana Jones vibes at all, or just terror? And the OP replies to this comment saying, upon discovering the pyramid, I was still in survival mode. I guess I had a little bit of an Indiana Jones vibe, hence why I did climb to the top. But I mostly just wanted to get out of the Everglades as quick as possible. Mind you, I had heard and seen the wolves before I was dehydrated. I had a half-full water bottle with me after I lost the kayak, and by the time I saw the pyramid, I had been dehydrated for less than 24 hours. If I go up to any archaeologist or college professor, I doubt they will believe me. Finding a pyramid in the Everglades is unbelievable, and would rewrite the history of the whole region. Most people don't believe it, let alone waste resources or time on it. There is no way I'm going back there. I steer clear of the West Everglades after that incident. Even if it did, I'm not 100% sure I could find the place again. Tell me the general location. I'll gladly die for some actual spooky shit, my dude. My face when my great-grandfather's groundhog rifle is at an M1 903 Springfield. He must really not like groundhogs. That's pretty funny. And then some people keep talking. You were supposed to go into that pyramid and find a great sword in the clutches of a mummified Atlantean king, and use it to cleave off your shackles and hew the Hyperborean direwolves asunder with the great ancient blade and your iron thews while you call out an oath to Crom. But instead you fucked up so bad, you not only failed to take revenge on the Serpent King who took your father's sword, but you let the reptiles have your great-grandfather's rifle too. Why the fuck would anyone kayak through a giant sweltering alligator spawning pit to begin with? There are campsites scattered along Lost Man's River, some picnic benches, etc. Have a look around on Google Maps. It would be cool if it wasn't fake and you actually confirmed the existence of the pyramid-like structure off that river. And then the OP comes back saying, I'm back, figure I may as well answer more questions. I don't suggest it. You could easily die out there, even without the paranormal jazz. Exposure and dangerous wildlife can easily kill you. Please don't go out alone. And please get to know the area first, or better yet, don't go at all. I've attached a better, more updated map, sitting at Chokolotski, where I first pushed off with my kayak. The green line is the first day, red line is the second day, purple line is the third day, and orange line is the fourth day. All black dots are where I camped or where I got picked up. I had to navigate through mangroves and crap on foot for the fourth day, so I figured that the temple could reasonably be anywhere in the orange circle, with the orange dashed line being an approximation. Keck, I thought the same thing when I was given the rifle. Your comment made me chuckle. Why the fuck would anyone kayak through a giant sweltering alligator spawning pit to begin with? Another Anon already pointed it out. But the outer area, where I was kayaking in the first 2 days, have designated camping areas about every 2 or so miles. I suppose something about the area is just charming to people. I go because I like the area, and I like isolation. Hence why I went even deeper. Not faked, but I appreciate the article. I've heard about other pyramids around the Everglades, but there seems to be only mentions of them here and there. I've also heard about one near the Lost Man's River, but I believe that their story says they just viewed the temple from a distance, never visiting it. And that is the last we ever heard of from Florida Anon. To start, I apologize in advance for the length of the story. I want to firmly make sure that I do not care if it is believed or not. If you cannot believe it, I can only say I understand and would it myself if I hadn't experienced it. This was 3 years ago. I was doing postgraduate studies which concerned Aboriginal communities. I was allowed a placement in the Yolngu town of Ramijin in the Arnhem land, which is a tiny strip of halfway urbanized land that borders the huge fuck-off bog, which is rather kindly called Arafura Swamp. The swamp is probably one of the most wild places in Australia. Imagine a country-sized swath of perpetually decaying forest flooded in a stagnant, foul-smelling water plane, and with crocs a real danger. My place was basically a shack, and it was right at the edge of the swamp. It was technically not within the town limits and actually sat a good couple of miles away along the dirt road. It was an abandoned country house, and I had it all to myself. The back had a veranda that looked out over the great black swamp, some very impressive views come dusk, and on either side it was enclosed in a dusty circle of eucalyptus. I knew literally no one out there, and won't lie when I say I was pretty creeped out those first few weeks, trying to acclimate to being more truly alone than I had ever been before. In this old, rusty tin shed of a halfway house out of town in a clearing at the edge of the swamp. But adaptiveness is a virtue, and I soon found myself spending my spare time fixing up the place and even sowing seed out the front and chopping some littered trees down. I remember my pride as I felled a small tree for the first time after hours of panting. When I went into town and sold off the wood, I told the folk there it had taken a lot less time than it really did. They were all well accustomed to hard labor, and it was quite a culture shock when I took dinner at homes that didn't have a television, let alone a computer. The people did not all live in exactly what would be termed poverty, as some places were wealthier than others in a typical sense, and there was a real effort of maintaining a distance from some norms of outer society anyways. For example, there was and remains a ban on booze that was taken fairly seriously while I was there, so I was sober for a full year, although many hearing the story have suggested I was drunk or high. The first month or so was rocky but invigorating and really kept me going. As I've said, I struggled a bit with the isolation and having to spend my time doing things I never would usually, like tilling the soil and chopping timberwood, but it was a good detox, and after a while, the smell of the swamp got less shit. At first, the sounds of the different birds and the nightlife damn near kept me up at night, but in time I learned to distinguish the birds and reptile noises and found comfort in them. On 2 occasions, I was lucky enough to hear the booming voice of a croc near the house. It was real back to nature shit, and by the second month, I really got into the swing of it, but had adapted fully to having long periods of time alone with myself in the bush. It was sometime this second month that it first happened, though at the time I thought nothing of it. I was sitting on the back veranda on a very warm, crisp afternoon. I was reading, I think, when after some time I became aware of a strange silence. I had to strain my ears for a while, but soon I could confirm that there was only the sounds of a slight breeze, the soft movement of water, and the creak of my rocking chair. The usually all-enveloping choir of birds, bugs, and frogs had at some point subsided. As I registered this sudden silence, I, feeling like no other, crawled down me, and I actually physically shuddered. It was like my bones were briefly frosted, and I was washed over with an internal coldness and a tingle throughout my skin. I became very dizzy, and I thought I might vomit. So I stood up, and in the second that I put my head, it happened and was over before I could register what I had seen. It's impossible to describe how I must perceive at the time. All I can say is that I saw a nearby tree, a long, thin, white spear that stood some distance back from and beneath a couple bigger ones. This tree was like many others. It had shed its branches, leaving just the thing trunk standing upright. What I saw was this tree twitching rapidly, like it was having a fucking seizure, before wriggling into place and going still again. No other tree nearby did the same. I doubted my own eyes. Dizziness, forgotten I stared at it a long time. Not terribly scared, but not particularly comfortable either. I could not tell what I had seen and whether or not it was a side effect of head rush or not. The tree just stood there, still as ever, and I noticed the birdsong had come back and warmth returned to my body, and I forgot about it for a long time. I had gotten in with a school teacher in the area and now spent 3 weekdays getting to talk to kids at the education center, so I was spending less daylight hours at the house. On those swamp-lit dusks, I would tend to sit on the veranda and have a quiet smoke, maybe read until night came. As summer was turning into whatever season came next, the cycle was not very pronounced in that region, which remains very humid most of the year. I noticed an increase in insects. I don't mind bugs, but I think everything is slightly creeped out by those long-legged flying crane flies, but which in that area were called daddy long legs. I remember sitting at the veranda and seeing for the first time a great swarm of the things, maybe just hatched, forming great clouds against the orangey light of the sky. The crane flies in that swamp got so fucking big you could hear them rustling against each other, and that is no exaggeration. These things could be meters away, and you could hear the vibration sound of their wings. As I say, I'm not too afraid of bugs, but when I went to take a piss in the middle of the night, the toilet was a bit of an outhouse, and found myself in a cramped space with a gull-sized crane fly buzzing around the light. occasionally bumping into me and feeling my body with its long, horrible legs. I was a tad on edge. The other bug, which began to cause me some anxiety, was a kind of mollusk like a barnacle, which would appear in clumps on the water's edge after it had been raining. These things weren't particularly creepy, but they worried me because they grow rapidly and would often spread to the steps on the veranda. I asked a local fisherman how to remove them, and he went into his truck and returned with a metal paint scraper, so I added the job of scraping these little barnacle things off of the old wooden steps. It was not fun experiencing their reddish interior bodies, the way they peeled off like a hard-shelled scab, and the truly noxious smell. Aside from the growing presence of the insects inside and around the house, I was keeping well. I kept clearing the area of weed plants and chopping down little trees to sell in the town. As well as insects, the seasonal change had brought a tide of litter in the water, which I was told happened every year. More and more clumps of old plastics and bottles and shit was accumulated in a line of detritus outside the house. I started picking it up in the mornings, keeping the water clean while I was there. It was as I did this one morning that, for whatever reason, I chose to look directly up at that old white tree I'd briefly freaked out over and saw it was not there. At first, more confused than frightened, I paced the water line, convinced I had mistaken where it was placed, but no, there was no mistake. Everything about the area looked as it always had, clear in my mind from many evening study, all but that little tree, where now there was a bare spot of land. I had no time to think of it, but as I spent the day teaching, I more and more dreaded the return home. I even tried to arrange for a couple of friends I'd made to come over that night, but they insisted on postponing until the weekend. So I drove home alone that night, and when I got back, it was full dark. The evening calls of the owls and swamp birds gave me a little comfort. I couldn't shake the image of that shivering tree. I had no reason to think anything of it, nor what it might mean, but the image, like a horrible glitch in reality, pestered me no matter how much I tried to distract myself. I'll never forget that night as I lay wide awake in the dark, hearing outside my window this sound, this slow, drawn-out creak and cracking noise. I'd heard it before, one sound of the forest out of many, but on this night, it pierced my frayed nerves. I lay there a long time listening to it. It sounded like some kind of rickety pole were swaying barely inches from my window. I was too shit-scared cowardly to look out the window, so I examined the patches of moonlight it cast on the floor. I could see so many moving things, the limbs of the trees in the wind, that it was impossible to make out anything. Then, with total clarity, I heard this dreadful noise. Tap, tap, tap. Against the glass, there was no mishearing it, no denying it, as plain as day, there was something tapping the glass just above my head. There was no tree growing near that window, nor even a bush or anything else for that matter. I frantically tried to think up contrived reasons. Maybe the guttering had fallen loose and was tapping the glass in the wind, or it was one of those crane flies hitting the glass. But I couldn't bring myself to look and lay there, rigid, pretending to be asleep. I waited like this for about 20 minutes before the noise faded. It took me a while to work up the nerve to look out, but of course, when I did, there was nothing there. After a while, it was easier to convince myself that it actually had been something normal, that it was just a minor thing, and got to sleep. The next day was particularly bright. It was that kind of heat which is thick and palpable in the air, which is saying something given the usual weather. In a way, my memory of the day, revisited so many times it saturated in heat, like a photo gets dimmed over time left in the light. When first I got up, it was just another day. The events of the previous nights and the odd tree were forgotten as I went through the automatic morning rituals. It hadn't gotten really hot yet, and everything was nicely lit. The view of the swamp was gorgeous. The sun behind the canopy seemed to frost every leaf with gold. There was an upswell of bird noise, and I saw a couple of waiting birds out for frogs or lizards, anticipating the heat of the day. I worked a lot on my study in the morning. After a few too many coffees, I came down with that overstimulated restlessness and couldn't focus on work anymore, continuously looking out the window and finding chores to do. The view out the window was especially appealing. The caffeine and the brightness projected everything in rich detail. Seeing some rubbish on the shoreline, I convinced myself to dredge it out. So happily, I went down to the water and mucked around the little islands and rivulets, picking up the junk that had floated in overnight. Or maybe some had just been bobbing there a long time before I came. It was hard to tell, stacking it up onto a little pile of junk. This is when some strange things happened. In one moment, I noticed a bound book, half buried at a detritus bank around the shoreline. Consciously, I picked it out of the rest, having a feeling about it. So, I cracked it open. It's a bit encased in mud, and opened up a couple of pages. It was the annual collected issues of a business journal. There were lots of different issues with covers and stuff. It seemed business-oriented. At the back, however, was a list of the year's grants. That included scholarships for university work. Scrolling the list of scholarship grants, I saw in plain delight, my name. Now, I haven't told this story to many people, but whenever I do, they seem unimpressed by this fact. Of course it was there. I did have a scholarship, and it was a business journal with a list of scholarship grants. I know, and I'm not saying it was paranormal necessarily, but understand how weird it felt to be the furthest you've ever been from home. Pick a random book out of the water and see your own name in it. Regardless of how stupid it was, I fucking shivered. I closed the book and put it in the pile of junk. Then I stood to get up and saw a man standing on the other side of the stream watching me. Already a little unsettled, I nearly fucking shat myself when I saw him. It wasn't that I just hadn't seen a single other person on this property since I'd been there. It wasn't just that he had been standing there silently looking at me. He was also standing half behind the trunk of a tree, so I could only see one arm and a leg and one half of his face. But he wasn't hidden at all, and couldn't have been trying to be. He was just standing halfway behind a tree. His shirt and pants were a browny gray and pretty faded into the background, but his face and limbs were white and stood out in contrast. Before I have time to collect myself, I see his one arm waving at me, in a friendly gesture, not in a threatening way at all. I wave back and then stand there, not knowing what to do because he doesn't fucking make a movement. He just stays exactly where he is, looking at me. There's no way I'm approaching this guy, so I just wave again, kind of vaguely pointing towards my house to indicate I'm going inside or something. He waves back, but still doesn't move. So I head back to the house, trying to carefully to maintain a steady pace. For some reason, not wanting to walk too fast to give away how rattled I was, and once I dared to look over my shoulder and caught sight of his leg, turned back and go into the forest. Slightly relieved, I went back home and locked the doors. I wanted to latch the windows even, but the heat contained in the house was already great enough with them open. The wallpaper glue was visible on the walls like sweat. The isolated events now weighed on me heavily. While previously, none of these weird incidents had overwhelmed my experience, I was now unable to stop my heart racing. Stop scaring myself with thoughts of that fucking man standing behind that fucking tree. With great difficulty, I calmed myself enough down to decide that heading into town was the best option. Not trusting the security of the place, I decided I would bring my laptop and shit. So I'm sitting at the table, brooding over my breakfast bowl, and I become aware of a disturbance of light on my right-hand side. I turn, and holy fuck, there's a face right there. I swore aloud and stood up, nerves on the edge of actually fucking splitting. The face leans back and I see two arms raised. It's a man, his shirt and whiteness making me instantly aware it's the creep from the swamp. I hear him say, "Sorry, didn't mean to scare ya," or something like that, and say he didn't know the place was occupied, that he saw me down in the swamp and was intrigued by a stranger to the place. He asked to come in. I said, yes, what else could I do? And went to open the front door for him. For a moment, he stood on the doorstep, then smiled and gave me his hand to shake and said thanks and nice to meet you and such. Then he came in. Up close, the guy looked pretty old. He was encrusted in a tan but clearly white, and his skin looked pretty cracked up and wrinkled in places. His face had a spooky quality, even though it wasn't particularly fucked up. It's hard to explain. It wasn't a major difference or anything, but his face and especially his expression just seemed a bit younger somehow than the rest of him. I was probably just days off the heat and the day's events, but this has always stayed in my memory, how his face was just a little off. It was sort of awkward, me walking pointlessly into the kitchen and him standing in the doorway between it and the hall, smiling but not talking. I asked if he wanted coffee, and he said sure and sat down, then asked about me, and that a whitey was doing out in the swamps. I told him about my studies and such sort of vaguely, tentative to say too much to this smiling, weird old guy. But As it turned out, he didn't seem to be remotely interested in me at all. He just smiled dozily, and as soon as I stopped talking, he started telling me about himself, without any indication of hearing what I just said. I put down my coffees and sat myself at the table as he carried on excitedly. He would sometimes get ahead of himself and just end a sentence with a jumble of gibberish words in this thick Bushman accent. He didn't seem immediately threatening, but I definitely did not feel like he was of his right mind. He said he lived up north, but lived off the land, in the swamp most of the time. For a long time, he just spoke of tilling the soil and catching his own food, living in huts and shit, but then he awkwardly cracked out a peal of laughter and asked loudly, "Do you got a girl here?" I was pretty taken aback, but before I could answer, his smile completely flipped and he asked, suddenly stern, almost angry, "Is there a girl here, mate?" I shook my head. Now the atmosphere had changed completely. He was gripping the table hard. And then just as quickly as it came on, this moment passed and he continued as if nothing happened. It was the most schizo thing I'd ever seen. I can't remember what he said after that, but eventually he showed himself out, coffee left untouched, and after walking a while down to the swamp, looked back at me and said, as if touching on a shared joke, "Couldn't keep a girl safe here, anywhere with all them bloody worrygals," and walked off. Worrygals was the word used to describe Aboriginal people in like the 1800s. Fairly creeped out, I locked up and took my gear and the car out to town. The heat wasn't letting up and the car ride is, in my mind, a bit of a haze. Outside the school, I saw another teacher packing her things into her own car. She waved and I pulled up beside her. I must have looked shaken because she asked what was the matter with me. I told her about the weird man, to which she grinned knowingly and said, "Did he scare you?" She said he was mischievous, but harmless. I remember her words. "He'll fuck with you, but he doesn't hurt a fly, if it is him." She said he wasn't often seen. It was as if she were talking about a folktale more than a real man. Apparently, this man had lived near the area about 9 or 10 years ago. As recently as that, he had been a regular visitor to the town and a well-liked guy. She had been much younger then, but remembered that he would drive through town and sell veggies and homemade jam, that he was fondly regarded by most. His wife was typically with him. She described them as a sweet old couple. The two were regarded highly enough that when his wife passed away, she was buried near the grounds, and some friends from the town helped to do the funeral. The guy was obviously distraught and seemed completely shell-shocked for a long time after it happened. His trips into town got less and less regular. His demeanor seemed subtly changed. Still jolly, but in a different, stranger way. His behavior was increasingly odd. Everyone understood his pain following the death of his only real close company. So when he referred to her in passing, her daily doings, as if she wasn't dead, there but mostly just sympathy, as well as the expectation that with some support, he would get back to his old self. But things were only downhill from there. There were uncomfortable encounters where he asked people if they'd seen her around, to which there could be no easy response. The discomfort was not lessened when he started showing up disoriented, crying, telling people his wife had gone missing and that a search party needed to be formed immediately. Things came to a head when someone refused to dance around the issue and simply told him the matter of fact. His wife was dead, buried not far out of town. By all accounts, the man's response had been shocked, though, not as unhinged as perhaps expected. He sort of sadly accepted what he'd been told and wasn't seen around town for a while. But when next he came back, his behavior was only more fucked. He announced that he didn't trust a single fucking worrygall and that he knew they'd done something with his wife. After some drunken spiels against worrygalls and anger at their having stolen his wife, keeping her captive somewhere, he was strongly dissuaded by some local leaders from coming to the town as he had used to, and seemed to understand because he wasn't seen in the town again. Word spread from some northern bars that he'd been so drunk as a fish, telling anyone who would listen to swamp worrygulls that tormented his wife in her final days, driving her mad with their mischief, and how he hadn't believed her until it was too late. He was now fully convinced that a tribe had taken her away and were holding her captive anywhere in the swamp. It also emerged that he had lost his house and his car, but he was still seen from time to time at the outskirts of the swamp, hunting. Eventually, he wasn't even regular at any bars, and as the years passed, he faded into a half-mythical figure, the mad old man of the swamp. Yet, he was real. Sometimes hunting parties from the town would see him, even trade with him, despite his now full-fledged hostility towards any and all Warrigals he met. So, this was the story she told me. She stressed, as I will here, that she couldn't confirm any of this, having only memories of the man's happy years and having not seen him since. Some of the tale probably was just the garnishing of legend, but that he was out in the swamp for long periods at a time was certain, and the hunting parties which came across him always reported that he was convinced of his wife's continued existence as a captive to some unknown tribe somewhere in the swamp. Now, this tale left me feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, but nonetheless a bit relieved. The frightfulness of this man was cut down a fair bit by the patheticness of his story, and I felt a bit sorry for him, but I didn't want to go home for a while and spend some time alone in the town before heading back out. I got home just past dusk when there was still a faint light around things, but as I tentatively looked around the house, half expecting something to just pop out and spook me, I was aware of a greater darkness than usual. It took me a while, but I investigated the windows and found that on those facing the swamp, there was a growing layer of those fucking barnacle-looking mollusks. It's hard to describe what it was like seeing a cluster of these cramped up on the glass, but if you've seen the inside of a rock clinger, the fleshy part under the shell, you've got a good idea. I almost gagged. I didn't much want to, but I worked up the nerve to go out and scrape them off. Well, the whole bottom part of the wall was practically packed with them. A lot had been there a long time, or maybe had dried up and hardened in the sun, because scraping them off was like pulling teeth, and when they finally fell down, they took a wee bit of splintered wood with them. Darkness settled, and I was still going, working by the indoor lights in my torch. It was only once I'd finished, leaving a sickly smelling pile of the things at the base of the wall, piles of husks I couldn't be bothered to do anything with, that I realized how late it was, and the deep silence that permeated everything. Little sounds were painfully heightened, enhanced by my frayed nerves, like the tiny drops of water somewhere nearby as a bird or a fish or something moved about, and the slight rustle of leaves on a mostly still night. I had the feeling of being watched. Now, I was well aware that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but after the day's events, couldn't be fucked putting up with this mischievous old cunt, so I quickly shone the torch across the tree line, fast enough to catch him if he tried to run away. But there was nothing, so I dragged the light along the bank, slowly, scanning carefully for any signs of movement. Every sound I heard was him fucking with me, and I shook a little. Then, as my grip steadied a little, I saw it. A cluster of dead vines, or a tree maybe, half slumped, half wrapped around the base of a big old conifer. For whatever reason, I couldn't help but focus on it. Something about it seemed distinctly out of place. Remember, I'd had a long time to get to know the panorama of the swamp, and something uncertain struck me about the white clump. Then, in one horrible movement, it pulled back and went behind the tree. For a moment, I could do nothing, paralyzed by fear, when the silence was broken by a loud series of creaking and cracking sounds, and I knew something large was moving through the brush. Wasting no time, I bolted indoors, and you can imagine the sleepless night I spent there, damn near pissing myself every time I heard an owl or the house creak. The smell of those fucking barnacles had permeated the house. The smell alone, like sulfur, could have kept me up. The tapping from my room resonated into the living room, where I huddled on the floor like a paranoiac. Somehow, the crane flies were getting in, and now and again, one would land near me, and I'd have to crush it. I remember hearing a sort of clicking sound and looking up to see my ceiling coated in the fucking things. As I looked at their black, massive bodies, the tapping seemed to register my pulse, getting louder and faster. I was sweating profusely, scared to look out the windows, trying to ignore the heat and the bugs and the tapping until it was too much, and I switched on the television. An old set that still had rabbit ears and picked up barely the glitchiest signal, but at least it drowned out the tapping. The screen just showed static and the vaguest forms of what looked like an infomercial or something, but the sound quality was perfect when I heard it. Within seconds of switching it on, annual scholarship grant has been awarded to Anon Anonymous, who will be doing field work up in Arnhem. Congratulations, Anon. The words just registered dimly, and I couldn't be fucked anymore. So I just left the set on, and the sound worked for a couple more names before giving out and giving away to a soft static when I turned up to full volume. The tapping noted this and got louder, beating like a metronome. At this stage, I was almost laughing. I felt a bit delirious and couldn't get a grasp on if this was really happening or not. Then a different sound beat down the corridor, a hard, loud knock at the front of the door. I waited in terrified stillness. Then came another knock, and then a voice. "Hey, Anon, you home?" The voice was familiar, my friends from the town. I'd forgotten they were coming over on the weekend. "Hey, Anon, we're meant to be hanging out, remember?" But why was he over at 3 a.m.? "Come on, man. I can see you through the window." I looked up at the big windows, but could see the dark night outside. Maybe I could see some vague thing, my friend waving, or just trees brushing against each other, or bugs at the window. It was impossible to tell. The thought of letting another person in made me realize the state I was in. The number of bugs on the walls, in the ceiling, and that god-awful smell. I shouted out that I was going to let them in. Just be a minute. No response. As I scaled the corridor, I noted I couldn't hear the tapping anymore. I flicked on the outdoor lights, but couldn't make out a thing through the dilapidated glass window on the door. I took the handle and cranked open the big front door, then looked out onto an empty deck and the barren front section. I called out if he was out there or not. From behind me, I heard the reply. "The other door, Anon." What the fuck? I think I definitely heard him calling from the front, but at this stage, I can't be sure of my own senses. So I just call out that he shouldn't be a lazy C-word and should just come around the front. A long pause as I stand at the front of the door. Then, "Come on, Anon, don't be lazy. Come around and open the door." At this stage, I feel barely awake, hardly registering my steps as I move back down the corridor. As I near the side of the house where I scraped off the barnacles, the rank smell increases steadily, and I approach the back door and look through the window to see if anyone's there. For a moment, I see nothing, just the bare swamp on all sides. Then I turn to look onto the other side of the door and see, looking back at me, a face so fucking horrible. I don't like to even think of it today. The only thing I can compare it to is the pic related. I fucking screamed and fall back, and it fucking bolts. The shock left me dizzy and I thought I would vomit. The smell reeling together whatever sanity I had left, I knew I had to board up the windows, lock the door, and wear out the night. As I regained my senses, I had to hold onto the wall, grab onto things to pull myself up onto two legs. Once I did, I was still wobbling on my ankles like seasickness when I heard the unmistakable scatter of pots across the kitchen floor. I turned and realized I'd left the front door wide open. And the heaviness of the heat in the air seems to sink into my pores, and I'm weighed into the corner against the back door. The chills that ran down my body were palpable. I couldn't have made a sound if I wanted to. I was entirely fixed on stilling myself and listening with an almost morphine clarity. The adrenaline, I guess. Then again, the clash of disturbed cutlery and a slow wheeze like a choked inhale. When it was silent and still I could barely contain body shivers, my mind wasn't processing a thing but for any noise from the kitchen. I registered the cold impression of the door handle in my palm but wouldn't dare turn it if it creaked. Then a soft crunch, like of skin pressing on the floor. I saw something white breaching into the corridor. And again the low wheeze. Leisurely, the small round eyes swiveled around and looked right at me. I fucking bolted it through the door, a flash of white through the windows, running for an open door. I burst forward blindly and ran, not knowing which direction or where. I couldn't afford to care that I was heading straight into the swamp. The idea of turning back for the car or going around the house was, once I'd started running, a debunked option. It didn't even occur to me. The feeling of mud permeating and squelching in your shoes and the knowledge of it caking there, making every step painfully loud. More than once, my foot caught a tough root and fell ass over tit. But again, I couldn't afford to recognize it and just got back up every time. There was no visibility even by the time my eyes should have adjusted to the light. Any moonlight was totally obscured by the overcrowded canopy. As I ran, there were no sounds, but by the time my body had run past its limit and I was drunkenly heaving through the trees, sweating, I could hear a lot of bug noise on the water and occasionally snippets of bird wings shaking off nearby in weird croaks. Frantically, I tried pick out that awful wheeze, but couldn't focus on this for any extended period, because doing so seemed to make the experience into a practical reality, instead of a fever dream as I could only bring myself to process it as. There came a time when I wasn't even moving at speed, was a sweated out mess, borderline unconscious and soaked in mud. There was no sign by which to gauge where I was, only the huge figures of the trees around and the lumpen masses of the swamp. My knees started slipping under me, and I heard a splash that silenced all the bugs as I slumped into the water. My entire body succumbing to that pins and needles numbness all at once. Face half buried under the waterline, I only jerked my head up with difficulty, and the brackish water smelled richly off that sulphurous wreck. For a long time I lay there, in a small pool to myself, my skin sensing nothing around it. Gradually the bug noise returned on the water surface, and it seemed like I could hear the distinct clicks and water plops of each one. Nothing of the light nor sound changed. If there was a moon, it was lost under layers on layers of branches and clouds. It was impossible to tell how much time had passed. I couldn't even guess how long it had been till this weird noise emerged, slowly from somewhere to the east of me. Immediately, I knew it was no animal or forest sound because it was the sound of television static. The bug life went quiet, and even the sound of the water and the canopy seemed to die out as the thick, white noise spread out and neared. It took all my strength to muster just one arm. There was now the quiet splish splosh of feet in the water, growing louder. Outstretching the arm, it felt like every sinew in my shoulder would snap. My fingers gripped the first thing they found, and I sensed my body being pulled forward, somehow mud-covered, shivering like all hell, and every joint burning. I slumped into the upturned husk of a log and, out of the bare scraps of energy left in me, pulled myself fully onto the dark tube, then muffled the dim splish-splash of footfall. Then I sort of fell limp like a rag doll, unable to exert any more. Somewhere nearby, I heard a faint. Now I couldn't control my breathing or stillness. I could see nothing but for a crescent slither of the log opening near my feet. The inside of the log was very cold and clingy, but my discomfort meant nothing as I strained out onto the little crescent slit of visibility. For a moment, it was blotted out by something big and white. The sound of static was overwhelming, as if the television had been dumped in the bog. But then the thing was gone, and in time the noise faded. And in time, the bug noise picked back up. I didn't know when I passed out. My clothes were wrapped on my bones and had dried there. This was the same for the mud of my shoes. For a moment, though, I thought I was paralyzed. Then an inch of crushed log under me gave way, and I realized I was half fossilized into the shit. My eyes were so encrusted with dirt and gunk that at first they wouldn't open, and there was a dull stinging as I peeled my eyelashes apart in the full light of the sun burned through, overwhelming my senses. It took me a little while to realize I was awake and where I was. The compost odor of the log's interior and the brushing sense of things moving around under me and certain wet objects winding slowly through my hair alerted me to that. The feeling of worms feeling across my scalp, curling at the roots of hairs, should have made me want to carve all my hair out, but there was no way to think about this which made sense to me anymore. I wanted only to pull myself out of the husk and back to the house. I knew I had to pack my things and not return. There was no recovering from this. Yet at some level, I knew how truly lost I was already, and how hot the day was, and how parched my throat and mouth. My retinas were burned, ragged with heat, and too little sleep. As I lifted myself up, bending my knees and dragging my body out bottom first, I noticed something different under my arm, a distinct lack of feeling in my armpit. As I peeled myself out into the shallow pool of last night, shedding spiders and worms falling out of my hair, I examined myself. There were a lot of cuts on my arm when the mud was scratched off. But then I lifted the arm up, and this time could be no calm, and I screamed aloud, again and again and again, when I saw the whole of my armpit overfilled with a great hardened cluster of barnacles. I screamed so much I was dry heaving and fell onto my knees in the water. In a moment of panic distraction, I forced myself to notice how the pool reflected the blue of the sky exactly. Without the blackened trees, the scene would appear the two intersecting planes of sky and glass. But the feeling of all those thousands of little shells forming piles in my pit and the little islands of them that filled down my arm and in the tips of my ribs. Concentrating myself, improvising a gross curiosity, I took my hand to the rock-like outer surface of the main lump and gritted my teeth as the nails scraped down, catching on some gaps and then prying as hard as I fucking could. There was a loud crunch and a lightning bolt of pain struck my side, causing to reel over once more. A crack had appeared in the lump, under which was the pinkied end of the inner goop. But I couldn't shake the awful source of that pain, the feeling of their thin little roots pulling and popping in my skin. Finally, I vomited. The numbness of it was now overcome by a hyper-awareness of all the little roots spread out in my meat. It took all my might just to push past the sensation to find a rock. With the rock firmly in hand and sweating hard, I brought it down once, twice, and again on the mass. Each time it cracked and popped, but the pain worsened, and the throbbing, horrible awareness of all those roots only increased, like they were clinging harder in there. Somewhere through the trees, the smell of smoke, and I'm moving towards it full speed, delirious. There's the whisper of a crackling fire, and all I can do is follow, desperately. The emerald light of flames burned through the air, and the rich smell was so reassuring that for a moment I forgot about the horrible things in my body. I stumbled out of the conifers into a small clearing, which looked like a drained patch of bog where could be seen a crude sort of timber hut, looking hastily assembled from a few small trunks, offering little cover. The fire was burning only a few meters off, unshielded from a pile of dry twigs and leaves, with no regard to the hut. Then my eyes were drawn to the outer rim of the clearing, marking its boundaries against the water, where had been erected several sharpened pikes, each adorned with the black faces of rotting animals. They mostly seemed to be dogs or possums, but it was impossible to tell the degree to which most had rotted away. The sight of these things, intermittently swamped by the smoke, was something to behold. "Who is it?" came a voice, and it occurred to that a figure was moving somewhere inside the wall of smoke. "Please," I blurted, hardly coherent. "I'm sick. I need help." The figure was still a while, then moved forward. Unshrouded by the blackness, I recognized immediately the bushman's old, young face. At first unsmiling, squinted, then beaming, alert and wide-eyed on seeing me, as if to say, "I'm so glad you could make it." Here my memory falters. I know I collapsed a few times, maybe fainted, because the guy told me so. To this day, I can't remember how we got into his hut, where I was splayed on an unstable stretcher bed and told to be still while he got something. Next I know, his dry old fingers are pressing something into my mouth, pills, and I swallow automatically. Then, while his fingers are in there, he sort of wriggle them out. They taste like shit, and starts hooting with laughter. Then a drink bottle nozzle, a drink of water to wash them down. I asked what it was, and he busied himself with something in a bag for what seemed like minutes before announcing Tramadol. As the painkillers took effect, I drifted in and out of sleep. When once or twice I woke, it was to see the man crouched at my side, working hard on my armpit, and a dull scraping noise, but no feeling whatsoever. At his side, I caught a sight of the ugliest looking dog I had ever seen in my life. It looked like it had crawled, full-formed, out of the swamp matter, its body either wet or hairless, looking like black mats of folded leather. There was a loud noise of blunt objects grinding against each other, a sick pucking sound, and then the slow schlup of the length of roots being dragged out, some snapping off halfway out, where they dangled limp from bloody little holes under my arm. The sight made me nauseous, and I looked to the dog, its grisly mouth unfolding in a friendly smile as he dropped the bulk in his hand into a bucket, where it hit with the soft, hard, wet sound of a hammer on a bunch of eggs wrapped in a wet towel. Promptly, tail wagging, the dog dipped its snout into the bucket, emerging seconds later, panting here, with the limb-threaded mass in its jaws, its thick saliva running with the blood as it crunched it up, and in painful-looking gulps began to down it. As it did so, I noticed how its gums were crowded with little, dried-out hole scars. I passed out. I came to some time later that day. The shadows were slanted at a new angle, making deeper shades. It seemed to be late afternoon. The day was still boiling, but a strip of gray clouds hung in the otherwise abandoned sky. A constant stream of wetness poured out of my bare chest and arms, and I could feel it pooling underneath me. Groaning, I moved onto the one arm and nervously looked at the end results. There was a lot of blood and dirt, and no bandages. There was also a small series of Black holes cramped in my flesh under the arm. The hair, it seemed, had been uprooted with the stuff, each leaking a little stream of blood, baked into a light crust in the heat. A couple still had small roots hanging out of them. Teeth gritted, I pulled these last remaining ones out, all too sensitive to the feeling of their wet length peeling out, in the cold of the air on nerve endings and exposed meat in the newly excavated hole. As I leaned on the arm to sit up, I felt the ungodly sensation of all the holes stretching open and taking in a collective gasp of cool air. But the fever seemed to be fading somewhat. I wanted to thank the man. He was nowhere to be seen, and I was too weak to call for him. But I saw that prehistoric-looking dog was still sitting at my side, panting happily. I put my hand down and rubbed the side of its face. Then when it moved closer, I patted it slowly. It panted and salivated. The shadows grew longer, and I managed to put both feet on the bed, leaning at the waist to pat the dog, which was loving it. It was the closest I'd had to a normal experience in so long, that this simple activity felt like the greatest comfort in the world. Then the man stopped in, grinning madly, and asked how I was doing. I told him good and thanked him profusely. As with the previous time, he seemed to zone out, just wanting to say his piece. Unceremoniously, he thrust me a plate of ill-smelling meat chunks, as if to shut me up. I was, and am to this day, a vegetarian, yet that rancid meat will probably always stand out in my mind as one of the best meals of my life. "Glad I found you," he said, more than once. He spoke in that same hurried pace as last time, if not more. He seemed to not want to discuss my health or how he removed the barnacles, opting instead to give me a long spiel on the fucking worrygalls. However, as he went on, it was clear he considered the barnacles just an extension of the worrygull phenomena, some kind of tactic they used or form they took, but it wasn't even that clearly defined. He connected patterns with all the enthusiasm of a conspiracy theorist, all the time chucking the dog little chunks of his plate, eating none himself. Somewhere in the distance, a series of whoop sounds hollered. My ragged nerves demanded I genuinely stick out my head in that direction. The old guy just went on talking. I observed that the sky was quickly becoming more overcast. They were getting trickier, he said, but the end was near. I asked how far it was to town. He didn't hear or care and gave me a stern look as he said he knew he was close now. He'd found pictures of her, he said, and his eyes lit up. He pulled 2 mud-caked volumes from his bag, and with practice flipping open them, both to the pages he wanted to show me. I examined them. One was an old etching or photograph, it was hard to tell. The other, a woman's weekly magazine from a few years ago, in which she had drawn a hard circle around a face in the background, in both a woman, though clearly not the same person. But I nodded regardless and said, "This is your wife?" Now he stood up, his plate crashing onto the floor. "How the fuck did you know that, eh?" he yelled. The dog released a low whine, recognizing the change in atmosphere. No, the sky was pocketed with light patches. Drizzle was beginning to fall. Improvising out of fear, I said that he told me all about it at my house the other day, and repeated what I had heard from my friend in town, but as if I wholeheartedly believed it. As he listened, he seemed confused, then weakened, almost apologetic, and sat back down, picking up the plate and continuing to feed the dog half-heartedly. "Yeah, I did, didn't I?" he mumbled, convincing himself as he spoke. I realized he did not know how many days had passed since we'd met and struggled to bring the memory into clear focus, his face a picture of frustration. Then a light moved across his face, and he was back to the big smiles and frantic speech. "They had her in a glass vault," he said, "in the middle of a carving out in a dry patch of woods. They used rituals. Didn't play by our rules. They said," as he said, "disgusting, so disgusting." As he said this, he threw pieces of meat into the dog's mouth faster and faster. "At first, I thought she was just getting old. Seeing things," he said. "But then we found footprints heading to the house. None leading back. That's when I knew they were coming for her. And now they want me. They want to draw me out, lure me with these pictures." He produced more magazines, with almost every page showing a circled woman's face. He went on and on about how they disgusted him, about how the only way to get her back was to play their game, however long it took. But he kept returning to disgust, how much they disgusted him. The rain beat harder and harder, dripping through the wide spaces in the roof of the hut, and it seemed to push him deeper into the spiral he was on, of talking about his disgust. Once he'd said it, he couldn't shake it, and seemed to be unable to contain his disgust. Then he grabbed the dog's snout hard and yanked its head first towards me. "See that?" he shouted over the rain, thrusting the whining dog forward. "See what they do?" Forcibly impervious to its attempts to wriggle away, he pulled its lips up and pointed out the hole-ridden gums. "See?" he screamed, more worked up than ever. The rain was splashing, though, quite strong now. His eyes were furious. He seemed not to notice as the dog cried and dug its claws into his hand, hard enough to draw blood. He had gripped its top and bottom lips hard and was screaming more and more, as if to drown out its cries. "See what they do?" as he pulled the top and bottom jaws wide open. "No," I said weakly, as there was a little crack and the dog gave a long howl of pain and began wriggling harder and faster, baiting his master's hands incessantly for him to stop, but he only pulled harder. How disgusting it is. Even as I limply raised an arm to protest, a line of blood was forming at the sides of the dog's mouth, its big wet eyes filled with pain as the edges of its mouth ripped and split further and further. It was now going nuts now, howling for its life and striking over and over, but he lifted it off the ground and with a face of furious effort, slowly wrenched its jaws apart until suddenly they snapped fully apart. Spread out, broken, revealing its raw, gagging throat slick with blood, which released an unearthly, gurgling moan. With that, he dropped it to the floor, but the poor thing couldn't stop making that noise, and thrashing, beating its skull against the hard floor over and over with bloody thumps, splintering the jaws even further, until finally it must have just given up because it lay there, moaning softly, its little chest raising and lowering with pained breaths. Wasting no time to collect myself, he picked up an already sharpened spike and, in what seemed like in one movement, had picked up the dog and dragged its entire body through the pike, so only the tip announced itself over the split jaws. I wanted so badly to believe that it was dead, but as soon as I saw one wet eye flick down to meet mine and had to look away. As if reading my mind, he said, with a gradual return to his vaguely sad confusion, "They have to be alive for the rituals." He shuffled out of the hut, bearing the pike on his back. I knew I had no escape, but the rain was only getting worse, so I went out, foolishly to observe his efforts in clearing the ground and drilling the base of the pike into the ground, establishing one more totem. But I noticed a sense of something about him. He let go of the pike and, rain running through his scruffed beard, stared out into the forest. I followed his gaze, past the lines of conifers and the overlapping walls of mist, just in time to see it. A huge old pine, bending at the middle, shaking slightly, move almost back and forth in place, shedding a coat of water into the air. Then the tops of the trees, huge trees, rustled with the movement of something pushing them apart. As we stood under the fresh pike, there was a roll of thunder from the woods. Not thunder, a higher noise, like metal plates ground against one another, followed by a set of huge impending thuds that sent vibrations up my legs. Under the noise of the rain, I was aware of the sound of static and started back into the hut. The old man stayed out in the mud and the rain and began shouting things I couldn't hear. There was another deafening groan, and a dark shape brushed through the highest tops of the trees momentarily. The old guy was at the wall now, picking something up. A rifle. There was a click, and then immediately he fired. "Come on," he screamed. There was another shot, and another. The tectonic groans came more and more, and the trees were being bent and pushed by something massive from behind them, and the old man, screaming at them in the rain to show themselves. "Where is she?" he screamed, face red and wet and saliva stemming from his scarred mouth as he hollered, releasing a volley of shots in all directions. I moved to the edge of the door, slipping behind him in the frothing mud, all the while keeping my eyes on the forest line, transfixed in a sort of horrible wonder by the huge things in the pines. "Where is she? What have you done with her?" Through his screams, I could hear the wavering vibrato of tears. Then I saw it, if only for a second, this enormous black shape moving back behind the trees, then a long, tree-like limb stretching out and wobbling forward, testing the air like a feeler. The static sound and the sulfur smell were richer than ever now. The air felt electric, and now two more stood in full height and were taking ground, striking strides toward the hut. One snapped its lump of what I suppose was a head right around, and I caught sight of two white eyes. Too much for me. I turned and fled. I stumbled into the rain and cracked my bad ribs, pulling myself up as I hobbled as fast as possible, hardly able to see through the rain, as volleys of fairway bullets exploded against the deep tectonic scraping of the huge fucking things, and over top of it all, the man's wild voice, screaming its lungs out. "Where is she? Where is she? I ran for I don't know how long, splashing face down in every other rivulet, getting mangled by every other thorny bush. The landscape was totally changed in the rain, overflowing with little waterfalls and the nervous swaying of old trees in the wind. The commotion was overwhelming, and as I crashed my way through the dense brush, I became alerted to some calls coming from not far off. It was my name, in my friend's voice. Fuck this, I thought, and turned to run in the opposite direction, foot snagging on a collapsed branch. I yanked desperately at it, the voice getting closer and closer until finally it broke apart and I sprint forward, directly into the fucking thing. I screamed as its arms thrusted out of the trees and grabbed me by the shoulders and tried wildly to escape, until I was looking at the terrified, confused face of my friend from the town and his two buddies trailing not far behind. I will keep the rest of this brief. Needless to say, I refused to return to the house, so I was driven by my friends back to one of theirs. They reckoned I was suffering from exposure and got me a change of clothes and things. I was either unable or unwilling to tell the story in full. To this day, I remain quite unwilling, for obvious reasons. I only showed them the holes in my armpit and the parts about the mad bushman. I deliberately exercised everything else, back in the comfort of a lit, warm room, with the storm rattling the windows outside if it is taking place somewhere far, far away. I no longer trusted my own experience and fell into a sort of walking, lucid dream state. Not quite conscious and rational, but nonetheless aware of the impossibility of my own experience. But how had they found me, I asked. They exchanged odd, worried glances, then I was told this story. We went to yours at the arranged time. When we got there, we saw all the windows and doors were locked, even though it was sweltering, so we knocked at the door. No reply. We figured you just had gone on a walk or something, so we sat on the front porch smoking durries and cracked a few beers. A full hour passed and we decided to get up and go. Right as we did so, though, here he paused, obviously uncertain about how to retell this part. Well, someone shouted out from inside the house saying you weren't home. I was awash with full-fledged body shivers as he said those words. Well, we thought, what the fuck, seeing as we had been there for an hour and only now this guy decides to speak up, so we ask who it is. No reply. So we knock again, and this voice comes, coming from directly behind the door. Says that you've gone into the swamp. We keep asking questions, asking to be let in, knocking at the door, but we got no more responses. At first we thought, well, that it was just you pulling a prank, but as the rain came in, figured we ought to at least check, just in case. I let this information sink in. Then I asked, why did they think it was me pulling a prank? Why would I do that? Now the mood got really awkward, and many more glances were exchanged. Well, said my friend slowly, looking right into my eyes. Well, the thing is, it was your voice. The next few days were spent recuperating. My friends said that they would put me up until I found a different place, but it was clear now I couldn't continue there. I was no longer myself, didn't act the same, seemed rattled out of my own persona, and I knew the popular consensus was that I had gone mad. I got looks in the street, and I didn't blame them. When I resigned from the teaching position, it seemed a relief to the other staff. I guess word of my descent into madness spread fast. Only my friends who heard for themselves that unexplainable voice believed me. They were good to me in the following days, returning to the house I was never able to go back to and collecting my stuff. 3 weeks later, I was driving back home to a family who cried a lot and kept saying I'd get better, more for their own sake than mine. But I did get better. In time, I kept in touch with the friends I made there and completed my thesis on the back of the short experience I'd had. I won't bore anyone with the details of my reintegration period, except to say that it was hard and ongoing. There's only one more thing I have to add here. It happened as the place was being emptied of my stuff. One of those people who helped was the school teacher who'd been so kind to me. And like the blokes who found me out in the woods, didn't treat me like a nutter. She said it almost in passing for some reason, though. I'm certain she was aware of its full meaning. She said, it's no wonder you came across that old swamp bloke. That place you were staying at was If you use sleep sounds at night, stop. I was diagnosed with insomnia several years ago, I'd lie down in bed and my heart would race. My imagination would run wild, causing me to think of every terrible scenario that could happen, and I would sweat so much that sometimes I would have to take a shower in the middle of the night. My doctor explained it to me in a way that compared it to someone with arachnophobia, a fear of spiders. The same way they see a spider and panic uncontrollably was the same thing that happened to me when I would try and go to sleep. I tried everything from nighttime yoga, deep breathing exercises, a new bed, medication, and even started to get a little dependent on narcotics. I used anything at my disposal to counter my irrational fear of going to sleep. Now, let me be clear. I was never a drug user. Never smoked or drank or popped pills to get high. But when I started using drugs to help me sleep, I knew that something serious needed to be done before it spiraled into something worse. I talked to a lot of online forums where people like me could connect and try to see that we are not alone. It helps. Having people to talk to who understand that insomnia isn't watching TV at night instead of sleeping. It's not staying up late on your phone and being restless. Insomnia is a condition. As I scanned the Sleepless forum, looking for some internet friends I had made, I stumbled across a post with an interesting title. It read, "I found the cure for insomnia." And usually when I saw something like this, it was some sort of sponsored ad, generally some bot trying to sell us pills or something. But seeing as though the alternative was to get into bed and have a panic attack, I clicked on the thread and began to read. The original poster, or OP, had this to say: "I found the cure for insomnia. I have slept perfectly every night since I downloaded the app. It's called Sounds Like Sleep, created by a company called Dream Systems." The OP went on to describe their experience with the app and how quickly it worked. I scanned down to see several regulars commenting and saying they downloaded the app and couldn't wait to try it. Others only had positive things to say about using the app already. So I downloaded the app as well. I keep a Bluetooth speaker in my bedroom, usually just to play some soft music while I cleaned or as a distraction from the insomnia. I made sure not to check the clock, as I found out early on that doing so would make me panic more about how badly I needed to fall asleep, which would only keep me awake longer. Insomnia is a cruel condition. I opened the app, which greeted me with a soft animation of a cartoony robot getting into bed. The app had several options: rainy nights, the beach of dreams, white noise, and soothing sounds. I had always had a fondness for storms, so I tried rainy nights. The volume was perfect, not too loud to draw my attention, but just loud enough to block out any other sounds. I sat on the edge of my bed and reached for my nightly anti-anxiety medication. The sounds of the wind and rain washed over me, and surprisingly, I was already feeling tired. Without taking the medication, I laid back and rested my head on the pillow. As always, my heartbeat picked up, I felt my face get hot, and I braced myself for the coming dread. I took a deep breath, held it in for a count of 5, then exhaled. A low thunder crawled across the room from my speaker, leaves rustled, and the rain picked up just slightly. I felt my heart return to normal and my face no longer felt hot. Not daring to disturb the effects, I closed my eyes without even getting under my blankets and fell instantly asleep. I woke up more refreshed than I had felt in years. I nearly sprang out of bed. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was 7 on the dot. I had no idea when I had finally gone to sleep, but it was late, and yet I felt amazing. I went on about my day like it was any other, only I was happy. I was energized, and to my surprise, the general anxiety that would often plague me didn't show its ugly face even once. Truthfully, I was looking forward to bedtime, just to try the app again. That night, I took the time to get under the covers. I set the app and this time chose the beach of dreams. As the waves began to crash gently, I closed my eyes, still expecting the wave of panic to begin. When it didn't, I sighed relief and almost felt tears begin to form. I've been a slave to insomnia for years, and now, with just the sleep sounds from this app, I truly felt cured. Before I knew it, I was asleep. The next morning, I woke up even more refreshed. I checked my phone. It was again 7 on the dot. I went through my daily routine with such a pep in my step that people even commented on how happy I was. When it was time for bed, I again set the app, this time to white noise, and got into bed fiercely. I was asleep in seconds. When I woke this time, I felt exhausted. like I'd run a marathon all night. I groggily sat up without looking. I knew it was 7 in the morning. I went about my day not quite as peppy as I had the previous days, but it was still better than before when I couldn't sleep at all. I felt odd all day. I knew I had slept, but I felt like I had dreamed I was awake or something. When I got into bed that night, I selected soothing sounds from the app and closed my eyes. Again, I fell asleep in no time. I awoke in such a panic that I thought I was having a midnight panic attack, something that was common for people with anxiety and insomnia. My eyes searched the room. I don't know how, but I felt like something was in the room with me. Left to right I looked. The room was empty. I looked again. There it was, crouched at the foot of my bed, with both hands on the blankets, as if it had just climbed out from underneath my bed. I saw it. Its hairs hung over its face, but when it saw me, looking at it, it froze. We were both frozen. I wanted to jump up. I wanted to kick and scream. I tried to, but my body was locked. Stiff as a board, I could not even begin to close my hand into a fist. I screamed internally at this thing at the foot of my bed. The only thing in my entire body that could move were my eyes. The thing cocked its head to the side. It didn't make a sound, but I knew that somehow it realized it couldn't move. I couldn't fight it. I had heard of sleep paralysis before. It's a state where your body is still asleep even after you wake up. It usually lasts only a moment or two before your brain tries to comprehend that you are both asleep and awake. I remembered reading that victims would sometimes hallucinate that evil things were in their rooms because when we're paralyzed like this, we begin to panic and manifest images of evil things that wanted to hurt us. This was a hallucination. My heart was thundering in my chest. I focused all of my energy into just moving a finger. I thought that if I could move one finger, then the rest of my body would follow. It was no use. I was trapped in my bed. The thing knew this. It pressed down on the bed with both hands and dragged its body higher up the bed, its long hair still covering its face. I felt the pressure on the bed as it pushed down with both hands. It was almost over me now. I screamed and not a sound escaped my closed mouth. I could feel its hair on my face. I slammed my eyes closed, and the sounds of the app filled my ears. I fell asleep instantly. When I woke up, it was with a gasp. I shot upright in my bed and looked around the room. Nothing. Empty. Just the light from the sun pouring in through the window. I exhaled a deep sigh of relief and went about my day. That night, I turned the app on. I chose soothing sounds again, no particular reason. I turned it on and got into bed. Like each night before, I was asleep in a matter of seconds, but my sleep didn't last long. Again, I woke up in a panic. My eyes shot open and I searched the room once more. Again, I felt my body locked to the bed. Sleep paralysis had me again. If I could, I'm sure my lip would have trembled in fear as I slowly looked down to the foot of my bed. It wasn't there. The long-haired thing that had crawled out from my bed last night wasn't there. I exhaled through my nose and looked up at the ceiling. It was above me, holding onto the ceiling like a lizard. Its long hair was hanging inches above my face. I felt the muscles in my body tighten. I never wanted to scream more than I did that night. With this thing over me, I could only inhale and exhale, unable to lift even a finger. I forced myself to breathe slower. I didn't want it to alert that I was awake. The sounds of my breathing slowed, and I heard it. Not from the creature clinging to the ceiling, but from the Bluetooth speaker that projected the soothing sounds of the app. "Come out," a voice whispered through the speaker. "Come out, sweet mother, and feast while it slumbers." The voice was so faint, I had to be imagining it as well. "Come out and feed." As if the creature had waited for this command, it began to move. Not its body, no, but I could see the hair moving. It had first faced the ceiling, but now above me, I watched as it was tilting its head back to look down at me. It kept tilting, extending further than humanly possible. The hair swayed as this thing whose body clung to the ceiling and back was to me. It now faced me. White eyes and razor-sharp teeth. It had tilted so far back that it was looking directly at me. If I could have, I'd have screamed until my lungs gave out. But I couldn't. My eyes rolled back and I did the only thing I could do. I fell back asleep, lulled there by the soothing sounds. I woke up at 7 this morning. I again felt weak, like I had worked out for the entirety of the night. Every one of my muscles were sore. I slowly got out of bed and went about my day. My day was uneventful. I felt tired for most of it. I didn't turn the app on when I got to bed. I was hesitant, but I had to know. I stepped out of bed about 30 minutes ago and turned the app on. I listened for a while. I had started to feel sleepy, but since I was standing up and out of bed, I was able to fight the sleep. 20 minutes in, I heard a voice, faintly over the sounds of the rainstorm. Come out, oh sweet mother, and feast while it slumbers.